Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We've made it to May, and this has been a year to remember so far, that's for sure, but we've got a great show for you today. Before we start off, I do want to mention, as United States and global health officials continue to address the spread of COVID-19, UNL is also monitoring the situation. Updates can be found at covid19.unl.edu and on the Market Journal website. And beginning our broadcast today, according to a study by the Nebraska Cattlemen Beef Association, the U.S. cattle industry lost over $13 billion by early April due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And from closed processing plants to packed feed yards, it's being felt everywhere. On Tuesday, I spoke with Mike Briggs over at Briggs Feed Yard about how his day-to-day operations have changed and advice for producers in a similar position.
I'm completely stuffed full. I've got a show list that's probably 25% of my yard. That's never true. For instance, my show list probably run from 200 to 500 head on the outside. My show list is 1,600 head. It's been that way for a month. There was 3 weeks where I barely got a bid for cattle. And now when they come out with a bid, you better take what they bid or you're not going to get any cattle sold again. And you can't keep these cattle forever. That's the problem with cattle. They're not really a storable commodity. You can't just say, well, I don't like the price and leave it in the corn bin. So you're in a situation now where you're just going to have to take it because the cattle got to go. I did it today. I went ahead and sold cattle on a Tuesday because these cattle have to go.
With the issues that have been happening with ethanol, curious as to if you've been running into anything regarding a reduction in DDGs and what you're doing to make up for that.
Well, that's a great question. Now, the plant that we get from, because we feed modified, they gave us a heads up quite a few weeks ago. Hey, we're going to have a planned shutdown on April 20th. So immediately we dropped our usage to half, but kept taking all of our product and stockpiling it. Now, as the weather gets warmer, that doesn't keep very good, but at least I have a natural protein source for my cattle for the time being. Now, with oil where it is, I'll be surprised if any of them open back up. So we're going to have to change what we do. We're going to have to go back to 30 years ago when 20 years ago when there wasn't ethanol, and we're going to have to change how we feed cattle and basically go back to the future.
And it was a few months ago we talked about how difficult it is sometimes to find good work at the feed yard. I know that's a challenge, and I would think with the pandemic makes things even tougher in terms of the day-to-day operations and how that's affected. So what are some ways that you're working to reduce the spread at the feed yard with your staff, ensure everybody's safe, and what advice would you have for others in a position such as yourself?
That's a great question. I've been concerned about it. You know, I know where my employees are, why they're here, what they do after they leave. You don't know. We've discussed it as a staff, how we need to be careful. Now, as far as our office is concerned, the girls are handing stuff to people through the door. People are not allowed in the office. As far as the outside staff, you know, the guys in the feed trucks, they're pretty well isolated. It's the cowboys getting together that you got to worry about. So we've tried to keep people, you know, at a distance and not be having little huddles in the cowboy room. You know, you need to be out away from each other. But like I said, I'm pretty concerned because when they're gone, I don't know what they're doing or who they're around. But we've tried to do our social distancing here as best we can. So I guess a lot of what we kind of do besides, you know, when they're out riding pins, they're by themselves. But then in the afternoons, we're not really doing group projects. They're out in equipment by themselves. So we're trying to do things like that. But we're aware of it and feel pretty fortunate that we haven't had an issue yet.
This next question regarding just how prices have been impacted. Slaughter issues causing live cattle prices to go lower, and then you've got box beef prices that are just shooting straight up. So if you could kind of give us a rundown on what you've been seeing there over the last few weeks and what you think is going to need to happen in order to get things more in line with where we'd expect them to be.
Well, you're going to be able to have the processing plants working full gear. That's just all there is to it. We're all very frustrated out in the cattle industry. We're sold cattle last week at $1.48, and then you see the beef quote at $3. Well, of course, that's infuriating to no end. Now the packers will come back at you and say, yeah, but our production costs have gone up. Well, they hadn't gone up a month ago when you were doing this to you. I implore every cattleman, they need to be calling their congressmen, they need to be calling their senators and make them alert as to what's going on. I'm not throwing a guy under the bus, but a local banker that's been in our community forever asked me about this today. He had no understanding of the economics of the cattle business. Well, he's not an ag lender, he's a commercial lender, so I understand that. But if he lives in this community and he's all of 3 miles away from my feed yard, there's no way people in Washington, D.C. understand this. So to all producers, call your senators, call your congressmen. They need to know. I've been on the phone with people in Congressman Fortenberry's office on a weekly basis, just to inform them of this that's going on. Now, the situation we have now where you've got reduced production, yes, the costs for the packer have gone up, so he's not making the extraordinary amounts of money he's been making for the last 90 days. So some of those economics have changed for him. The concern I have now is with beef going like it is, now you're going to have demand destruction. You're going to get it so high priced. There's so many people that don't have jobs. You're going to get so high priced, they're not going to be able to buy it. So when the packers do get up and going, here comes the supply of beef, and you've done so much demand destruction. What's going to happen on the other end? Well, then does it have to then drop again down to the consumer before he starts to buy it? And then we take another wave of a beating that, quite frankly, this industry can't stand.
You heard Mike mention how the changes in ethanol production are impacting DDGs. Well, we've got an interview scheduled with one of our experts over at UNL where we'll delve more into that topic. Look for that on next week's show. Moving on, and I was also joined by Jeff Peterson of Heartland Farm Partners on Wednesday to break down some of the top stories in the grain markets. Planting progress, advice for marketing old crop, and current updates in the ethanol industry were all on the table for discussion.
As we dig through everything, we like to go right through, since none of us have been through this, we say, let's identify the stuff we can look at. And we take a look at kind of the bottlenecks in the markets, and we start off on the ethanol side first. And, we had the ethanol numbers out this week, came in at 537,000 barrels. That's a new record low, and that came down from 563,000 barrels is where we were the previous week, which is down about 4.6%. But to kind of put that in perspective, Troy, that's down about 48.1% since the middle of March. And that's kind of the standard we've been using going back to the middle of March and looking at that. So we've had a big pullback there. But then we step over and we look at the gasoline demand side, and there's some positive things happening there. This week the new numbers came out from EIA today at 5.86 million barrels per day. And that's actually up 15.7%. It looks like the low went back in on April 3rd. And so we're at 15.7%. So that's a positive thing. And let me talk about why it's positive. So if we think that about a 10% of that gasoline is blended with ethanol, and it's a little bit less than that as you go across everything, but that means we need about 586,000 barrels per day. And if you recall, the number I just said was 537,000 barrels per day. Mm-hmm. So what we actually have going on is we've got more demand that's actually happening than what we currently have for the supply being produced. And we saw that in the ethanol stocks. That's the other thing we've been watching, the ethanol stocks. The ethanol stocks came in at 26.332 million barrels. And that was a very nice drawdown from where we were last week. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is that we're saying, you know what, it looks like maybe at least from the demand side, the overall numbers, we may have actually this week, Troy put in our lowest number on the ethanol production side.
As far as planting goes, could you give us a sense of how it's progressing not only across the state, but also nationally. What's the latest?
Yeah, let's take a look nationally and actually getting off to an excellent start. You know, you never have that perfect year where everybody is going, but this year is getting off to a very nice start. On the corn side, 27% planted. That's versus on the corn nationally versus 5-year average at 20%. Nebraska is running along well. We're not running as fast as some of the other states. We're at 20% complete versus the 5-year average of 16%. Believe it or not, Minnesota is leading the charge. They had a big week last week. And we don't have this happen a lot, but it does happen where they get off to a really good start. One of the things we're going to have to talk about, though, down the road, Troy, is what's that's going to do to prevent plant. We are thinking that there's going to be more acres up in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota that's probably going to get planted than maybe what we were thinking before. North Dakota is still having a few issues, but it's getting off to a good start. And soybeans are getting off to a good start, too. Nationally, 8% across the nation compared to a 5-year average of 4%. And actually, we're really doing really well on the bean side in Nebraska at 4%. And actually, normally this time of year, we only have about 2% planted.
Yeah, it seems to be plugging along a lot better than it was last year, that's for sure. Okay, so some folks watching right now may still have some old crop to market. What are some selling strategies that you could share with us right now? Because it is a time unlike any other, that's for sure. So if we could start with corn.
Yeah, so let's start off on the corn side first. I think one of our first things that we want to look at is basis is going to be a concern. And I think what that means is that we're going to have to work on getting that basis locked up on the old crop bushels, I would say. And then I would say be patient yet on the futures price. So think of it, we got the cash plus the basis, or futures plus basis equal our cash. And let's get that basis set and let's be patient here yet on the future side. I think we'll get some little bounce. We might have to ride this thing a little bit lower, but I think we'll get a little bounce based off some weather, some problems coming on later in the growing season.
Okay, and for soybeans?
And the similar thing on soybeans. I would also get the basis locked up there too. Earlier, if it hadn't been because of the problems we're having with the slaughter numbers, we'd have said probably be a little patient yet and hope that maybe China steps in and buys some. But I'd say because of the uncertainty about what the slaughter numbers are going to do, we better get the basis locked up. And we can be patient there also on the future side there also, Troy.
Okay. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Last week, we saw the oil futures contract dip into the negative. Is that something we ever have to worry about happening with grains?
Well, that's a great question. And as we dig into that, so let's just talk about the futures contracts. The futures contract, if you're long futures, if you stay in that contract long enough, you can be delivered upon and end up with the physical commodity. And if you're short and you stay short long enough, you may have to physically deliver or bring bushels against that contract. But the way the thing it's set up, it's a little bit different on the grains than it is on the oil. In order to be able to deliver, you'd have to have delivery stocks available within those delivery locations up and down, Mississippi River and the Illinois River. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we'd have to have that risk because those bushels would already be there. What happened on the crude oil side was really kind of a function of space, storage space. And actually there's many traders out there, Troy, that would look for opportunities when that spread between, that nearby month and that next deferred month gets too far out of whack. If it gets too far out of whack and they can buy it and they can pay the storage on it, and then they can go ahead and redeliver it the next month, it really becomes a risk-free trade. So I don't think we've got the risk there that they had over on the crude oil side.
Sure. And finally, Jeff, talk to our audience for a minute, because there are farmers out there that are really hurting because of this pandemic. So any final advice or any words of encouragement, anything that you would like to say to the folks watching?
Yeah, definitely. This is a great opportunity. They just need to take a deep breath. There's been some big challenges that they've had that have that they've been through. Know that they're not able to go ahead and handle this all on their own, and nobody expects them to. Reach out to, their faith leaders, reach out to their friends to go ahead and build that support network, and know that there's always going to be opportunities that are going to come up that are going to surprise us. So just like last year, middle of May, prices got down to, $335 on the futures and then rallied all the way up to $475 because there was weather problems. And I'm not saying we're going to have planting delays this year. What I'm saying, though, Troy, is that there's always the opportunity to see hot, dry conditions come in, even as bleak as everything looks, there's an opportunity that this market still can bounce. I'm not saying that it may not go lower later as we get into the fall if we got all these acres planted, but I think there will be some better opportunities to price than where we're at right now.
Next week, I'll be joined by Darren Fessler with Lakefront Futures. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al is back in the remote weather office again this week. And Al, what can we expect for the week ahead?
Well, Troy, it's been a fairly decent week in terms of planting. We've seen a lot of progress occur as of the NAS stats of Sunday. We were at 20% complete. 16 was last year, or 16 was a 5-year average, 12% last year. With the amount of lack of precipitation we've had this week, my expectations we'll see a significant jump in that. So overall, what we're looking at now is whether or not we're going to get a lot of precipitation. So if we go to the maps, as we look at today's upper air pattern, we'll notice a large trough across the northwestern United States and slight ridging across much of the northern plains with a little trough moving through Nebraska. But we have high pressure at the surface centered over top of us, low pressure to the south of us in Texas. It's going to bring some moisture up and interact with that high pressure system, and therefore we do have the chance for some shower activity, particularly today across the northwestern part of the state, easing a little bit as it goes to the east and nothing more than a few sprinkles. We start to see some low pressure developing on Sunday in the western high plains, and of course with that trough coming ever so closer, we start to see precipitation breaking out into the northern portions of the Rockies and potentially a few scattered showers in western Nebraska before the trough starts to strengthen on Monday as it comes into western Nebraska, and we'll see a surface low develop in southern Oklahoma. That will lift a lot of moisture up into the region. We'll start to see thunderstorm and precipitation break out across the Dakotas, edging into northern Nebraska, and that will start to slide toward the east-southeast as we go through Tuesday as that trough starts to dig toward southern Illinois. So high pressure will fill in behind it. The precipitation that comes into eastern Nebraska will be light at most, and most of the heavier and most significant moisture will remain to the north and to the east of us, so we'll be dry slotted once again. On Wednesday, we start to see a split in the flow pattern, kind of a southerly flow and a northerly flow, leaving Nebraska caught in between under high pressure. Not much in the way of moisture for regions develop over the Texas Panhandle, but you can see that it's pretty much high and dry in the northern plains. On Thursday, another system starts to slide into the northern plains or the northern Rockies with a surface low development across portions of south-central South Dakota. This will allow for some thunderstorm development across much of southwestern half of Nebraska, potentially some severe weather here, and that system intensifies even more as we go into Friday, starts to enter northwestern Nebraska. Surface low development in southeastern Colorado is a classic signature that we like to see for severe weather outbreak across the central plains. And in fact, the models are indicating we'll start to see some convection in Texas and also up in southern Montana, and that will slide into the region as we go into next weekend. So the 8 to 14 day forecast keeps the cold to the east and the warm to the west. And in terms of precipitation, although the models are shown below normal, I believe that we will see an above normal moisture with the system coming in this weekend. So, Troy, overall, it looks like we have some decent shots of moisture, particularly for southern Nebraska the end of next week and northern Nebraska this weekend with the potential for severe weather coming up. I won't be here next week, but I will be giving an extended forecast talking about the La Nina event, and I will be back here in 2 weeks. So take care, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, Al. With many farmers currently out in the field planting, now is the time to select your pre-emergence herbicide. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh talked with Extension Weed Management Specialist Dr. Amit Jhala to find out his recommendation for soybean herbicides.
The best way to keep weeds at bay and not damage crops is through well-timed pre-emergence herbicides. Nebraska Extension Weed Management Specialist Dr. Amit Jhala says in soybean fields, PPOs are the way to go.
PPO stands for proto-porphyrinogen oxidase inhibiting herbicides. They are commonly known as PPO-inhibiting herbicides. Those are group of selective herbicides. They are commonly applied in soybean, particularly pre-emergence. And they are classified as a group 14 herbicides based on their site of action. So there are three chemistry of PPO-inhibiting herbicides. For example, herbicides that contain flumioxazine, sulfentrazone, and saflufenacil. Those are three basic herbicide active ingredients that belong to PPO-inhibiting herbicides are most commonly applied in soybean.
Timing is essential when applying a PPO. If applied too late, injury may be caused to the seed. If applied before rainfall or if irrigated too soon, soybeans can be heavily damaged.
That is a typical character of PPO-inhibiting herbicides, like you have to use it before soybean will start emerging, or even I would say even before soil will start cracking, because if you apply when soybean starts emerging or the soil will crack, then sometimes it may cause injury to soybean seedlings. Therefore, yeah, you can apply before planting, but once you plant soybean, you have to apply within few days. Particularly herbicides with sulfentrazone, they clearly mention like you have to apply within 3 days after planting soybean. So generally, most of the herbicide labels in PPO inhibiting herbicides suggest that you should not irrigate, especially when soil will start cracking, because sometimes it may cause injury because herbicide will come directly in contact with soybean radicle that comes out and it may cause injury. So no irrigation within week, basically I would say, after applying PPO inhibiting herbicides. And sometimes when it will rain too much, like 2 to 3 inch of rain in single event, especially when soybean is emerging or soil is cracking, then it may cause some injury. So rainfall we cannot prevent, but irrigation is something some labels, particularly those herbicides with saprophenacil, suggest that high rainfall can affect the overall efficacy of those herbicides.
While they may not get all the weeds, when used in combination with other herbicides, PPOs cover a broad spectrum of unwanted flora.
So depending on which herbicide active ingredient as well as premix product you have been using, but in most cases when PPO inhibiting herbicides are tank mixed with some other herbicides, and there are a number of premix products are available in the market, and they are broad spectrum. They can control majority of broadleaf weeds, as well as they have great activity on number of grass weed species. So they are broad spectrum.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Amit says that PPOs have great residual activity and are good as long as you follow the guidelines. For more information on this topic, you can check out his article on CropWatch, and we've also got a link on the Market Journal website. Finally today, a couple weeks ago, we spoke with Glynis McClure about Nebraska Strong Financial Services. Well, this week we connected with Extension educator Jessica Groskopf to talk about the other side of Nebraska Strong and how to stay connected socially while being separated physically.
As some states around the nation begin to ease restrictions, many areas are still under lockdown. And as we enter another week of social distancing, the changes in day-to-day operations for farmers is becoming more apparent.
So there's lots of changes happening, for everyone. The act of physical distancing for most farmers and ranchers isn't a problem, right? We see online all the time, I'm going to be social distancing like I do every spring, but there's still changes in that workplace. So like you said, the parts store, where they can no longer go in to the parts counter, they have to call in the part number and pick up that product outside. Or they need to work with thinking through their employees, maybe even implementing a PPE program within their farm or ranch. Those are changes that until this time we hadn't really thought about.
Jessica says it's important to keep an eye on your friends, neighbors, and self and recognize the signs of extra stress. There's
usually some sort of withdrawal and also a lack of communication. So if you see somebody kind of pulling away or you feel yourself pulling away, that's really one of the first signs of stress that we see come forward. I think that it's really important that we're able to pick up the phone and call one another. Even if the internet's not great, those telephones still do work, and they work both ways. So if you're feeling yourself stress, making sure that you have somebody that you're talking to, or if you see somebody withdrawing, that you pick up the phone and you have that conversation with them. And it doesn't have to be, hey, I see you're stressed. It can be, how are you doing? How can I help you? I know it's hard sometimes, as Nebraskans, we don't always like to ask for help. And so sometimes offering that help is a way to help them through that stressful situation.
If you're unsure how to help or don't know who to talk to, there are many resources readily available.
Being Nebraska Strong is about also taking care of that mental health and wellness. So we have ruralwellness.unl.edu, which is a website that has lots of resources related to coping with stress. And then also we really encourage folks, if you need help, whether it's from a financial or a legal perspective, or especially from a mental health perspective, that you reach out to the Rural Response Hotline, and that's 1-800-464-0258. And they offer counseling vouchers as well as their regular financial and legal advice.
Communities across the state are finding ways to keep spirits up and relieve stress in safe but fun ways.
I think that communities are becoming more creative in how they're creating social distancing activities. Here in the Scottsbluff area, we've seen pop-up drive-through movie theaters. We've seen cruise nights, and think about those for farms and ranches as well. How can we continue to connect with one another and really make that effort that even though we have to be physically distanced from one another, that we're still socially connected with each other.
And if there's one thing the Cornhusker State is good at, it's staying Nebraska strong. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
You can find all the links and resources Jessica mentioned on the Market Journal website, and we hope that you're all finding ways to stay in touch and are staying safe. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media so you can join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.